My name is Chamberlain Oxford, and this is my U.S. History Semester 2 project on women's fashion through the decades. Starting off with the 1870s and moving on to the 1890s, 1900s, 1920s, the 1940s, the 1950s, the 60s, the 1980s, 1990s, and 2000s. Just by looking at these images, you can see how society influenced how women's fashion was born. We start off by looking at the fashion trends in the 1870s, just a few years after the end of the Civil War. Women usually would wear bustle-style dresses that were flat in the front but went out further near the rear to express the women's behind, as you can see in this photo. Corsets were very popular during this time to make the women appear slimmer in the waist and have a slim princess outline. With this kind of corset, a princess line style was created that had no bustle, but instead would feature long trains and lots of fabric below the hips. Women's dresses began to be seen in more color due to dyes being invented in the 1850s, with many vivid colors with the same color but different shades of it to layer the fabric was a huge trend back in this time. In America, it was still considered ungraceful to have a dress too short or showed too much of the woman's ankles or even just their legs. But women would still have their dress at their feet so that the dress would not drag. This would not change into the early 1920s. Next, we move on to the 1890s. Most of this time was known to be the Gibson Girl era. The dresses during this time had extra wide puffy sleeves. Their dresses at the waist had more of an hourglass shape rather than the slim princess outline we had previously seen in the 1870s. The women would wear their hair big above their head with flowers, large hats, and any kind of other accessory that kind of went with their outfits. The skirt of the dress was a lot less voluminous so that women could participate in more activities like riding bikes, horseback, and so much more, but were consisted of the same silhouette as a regular dress would. Sometimes show more of their shoulders and have a fuller skirt with designs such as flowers all over it. They also had more color for the fabrics. Next up, we have the 1900s. The 1900s had a very similar style dress to the 1890s, but as you can see in these photos, they no longer had such puffy sleeves, but now the appeal was to make the chest puff forward, and it would also have a little bit more fabric around the woman's waist. Corsets were still used a lot during this time, especially the health corset that didn't damage the human body as much as the other ones would. These corsets would push the bottom forward and thrust the hips back. The skirt of the dress was tighter around the thighs but then flowed more outward with a thick fabric, and women in this time would still have very large hairstyles and on top of their head usually was a large hat. Next up, we have the Roaring Twenties, also just known as the 1920s. After World War I, or the Great War, women wished for a more simple, comfortable style of clothing, and they found that the most popular trend was the flat chest look that all women, no matter the age, took part in. Their skirt had a very loose, straight fit and were now more appropriate in society because the dress was shortened but still sat below the knee. The dress's waistline dropped to the hips. These dresses embraced very long, lean figure and had a lot of vertical lines. Afternoon dresses had more tiers, skirts with flowers or a large bow at the waistline, and a little bit more dressed up. Pastel colors were making a pop in trends too during this time. There was also a lot of beaded and dazzled dresses who women called flappers would wear out. These women would go to clubs, jazz halls, and illegal speakeasies. These dresses would become very expensive and more extravagant during the later years. Next up, we have the 1940s in women's fashion, and this era was all about the hourglass figure. The dresses were still knee-length with an A-line and puffed shoulders. Pants were also becoming extremely popular during this time, varying from victory suits, wide leg, high-waisted pants. These were usually accessorized with hand purses, gloves. Makeup during this time was very natural, but we had a pop of the red lipstick to show patriotism because there was a lot going on in the US at this time. Evening dresses had spaghetti straps, showed more of a woman's shoulders, but only a little bit of cleavage to still stay conservative. The bottom of the dresses were long and elegant with a sleek fabric, and this was around the time of World War II, so high fashion was not really on the minds of the women. Next up, we have the 1950s. Women had a breakthrough with fashion after the war because they're now able to work in offices and manage their own money. But with fashion, they became a lot less restrictive. At this time, Christian Dior changes the world of fashion for women by creating masterpieces. This would start high fashion. Christian Dior was a fashion designer who took everything from the 1940s and changed it. The fabric was higher in and more voluminous. The shoulders looked less manly, and the dress embraced more an hourglass figure, which was different compared to the previous year. The skirts were still below the knee, and the fabric went out and made the skirt look full. Some skirts were more fitted, but were not as comfortable. Here in this image, you can see Marilyn Monroe modeling for Christian Dior, who was an icon during this time. But a lot of women did not like this kind of fashion, especially in the United States. There were protests. There was too much fabric, took too much effort to take care of, and this was a time made a mark with their slim suits, which were more comfortable than Dior's looked and still fashionable, and even more comfortable. The sack dress was introduced in the late 1950s, which was just a very loose kind of dress. This comfortable time ended up causing more problems than good. Depression rose higher than ever in that time, and housewives took antidepressants along with a lot of other drugs. Next up, we have the 1960s, which was a huge culture moment for America. The style was heavily influenced by this. Fashion took on bold color. Women took this newfound freedom in the 60s and cut their hair short. They used different fabrics like polyester. One of the most famous looks during this time was the shapeless shift dress with no waistline and, for the first time ever, a length above the knee. There was a lot of pop of color or pattern to stand out on these dresses as well. This decade is where the hippie style came from, with bell bottoms and tie-dyes, but you can see this more in the 70s. The hippie stood for peace and love, so that you're going to see this a lot in their clothing and their protesting. A lot of the influencers were people like the Beatles, Cher, and the Rolling Stones. During this time, people were protesting things like Vietnam War and civil rights, so you're going to see that a lot, especially with hippies. And some major events that were happening was the assassination of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King, and these events played heavy roles on the people that lived in the 60s. Next up, we have the 1980s, which was really similar to the 70s because they both had a lot of bold colors and patterns, but the 80s clothing had a lot of neon, as you can see: shoulder pads, legs warmers, leggings, oversized shirts, windbreakers. Jeans were also making a huge impact on this time. High-waisted jeans, acid-wash jeans, and just really denim anything during this time. Animal print got big, especially cheetah. Athletic wear or dance wear was worn outside with neon colors and unique designs. They wore their hair crimped with feathered layers or teased hair. Some fashion influencers were like Madonna, the Queen of Pop, and a singer and songwriter. Princess Diana, whose fashion and personality influenced so many people. Oprah, a famous TV producer, actress, and so much more. Meryl Streep, an actress and singer who won many awards for her many roles. Molly Ringwald, an incredible actress who starred in movies like 16 Candles, Breakfast Club, and Pretty in Pink. Olivia Newton-John, who is also an incredible singer and actress, most known for her role in Grease. All these women influenced the fashion and culture of the 80s and even so much after. And last, for our decades, we have the 2000s. Fashion was a mix of old vintage style, global, and ethnic clothing. A lot of the fashion trends were low-rise jeans, miniskirts, and boots and Uggs with layered tops. There were a lot of crop tops and belts of all kind over shirts and pants. Their hairstyle consisted of a lot of straight hair or curled hair and the new style of bob. Now, a big part of fashion was the runway or the fashion show with couture, which allowed a designer to show off their creative pieces and express their individual style. The first fashion show was with a man named Charles Frederick Worth when he decided to use real women instead of mannequins to give people a real feel of how his clothes would look. These fashion shows were originally known as fashion parades, which would host small amounts of people, and no photography was allowed just to stop the possibility of people copying designs. And this was mostly found in Europe, especially France, with the first couture house of Charles Frederick Worth. After World War I, these fashion parades expanded to the US and allowed more people to enjoy these designs and masterpieces. These models became more thin-faced and would walk in straight lines. They would show their own personalities, but not enough to outshow the outfit they were walking in. Runway show set what trends will be for that year. It gives inspirations to artists. It lets people get creative and fashionable with what they wear, like New York Fashion Week, the biggest show that is in America, just as there is Milan Fashion Week, Paris Fashion Week. It is how new and old designers advertise their new fashion lines.